We are glad you are here and welcome to Engaged In, where educators, leaders, and innovators come together to examine student engagement from every angle. This series invites you to deepen your understanding, expand your toolkit, and make meaningful connections that drive impact. Ooh, I am one of your facilitators. I can't believe it's April already and how many we've done of these, Sarah. It's crazy. I am Bridget Reith. I am a literacy coach and Ignite engagement coordinator, here at Kent Intermediate School District.
And I am Sarah Wood. I am one of the EdTech consultants here at Kent ISD. And just to kind of share a quick agenda here before we get started, just remember that our session today is being recorded so that you can watch this afterwards. To receive credit for today, you must complete the form at the end to get that sketch credit. And as always, we encourage you to liberally use the chat. We understand that sometimes people are joining from the road and can't always participate right away. And so feel free to use the chat or come off your mic. We encourage any way that you feel comfortable with. We also have the link to our presentation, which I will put in the chat here in a minute. But just remember that we are almost coming to the end of this series, which seems kind of wild to say based on how long we've been doing this, but it feels so short in a lot of ways. There is that option to double down on your sketch credit so that if you want to implement something from today, you can do that and earn an additional sketch credit. So we are going to start off with our activator here for our evening. I'm fumbling on my words today.
It's one of those days. It's okay.
Oh my goodness, it is. So we're going to do a meaningful moments. And so I'm going to ask you to just take a couple of seconds here to just sit and think. Think of your favorite learning experience that you had kind of in your own personal K-12 education. Like, what was your favorite? I'll just frame it as experience because that leaves it very open to a lot of things. And why does that experience stand out to you? So think on it for a minute, and then if you would like to, you can come off chat or come off your, let me start that again. You can turn your mic on. My goodness, and share, or you can go ahead and put that in the chat.
Sarah and Lindsay, I'm thinking through my, K-12 education, which was 13 years, and it was a long time ago. But I'm interested in the fact that two things are standing out to me, and they're very similar things. And so I'm going to say them as one thing. But one of them happened in first grade, and one of them happened in 12th grade. And so what I remember was when a teacher listened to an idea that I had and allowed me to run with it. And they both happened to be in the realm of dramatic interpretation. So when I was in first grade, I had gotten really into Winnie the Pooh. And I think my parents and I were reading, poems at home and stories. And so I asked my teacher if we could do a play about Winnie the Pooh. And I went to a very progressive school in first grade, right next to Central Michigan. And so she's like, sure, that sounds great. And so I, got a couple people to join me, and we were each a character. And I'm sure it was like the most ludicrous presentation of Winnie the Pooh you've ever seen, because we had literally zero adult help. It was just us making stuff up, and she gave us some time in front of the class to act it out. And then again in 12th grade, I hope this was a little more professionally done. But I had been reading Shel Silverstein poems and had just recently gotten a new book, second or third book of his that I had, and I was enamored of these. And so I went to my drama teacher, and I was a senior. There were four of us that were in the class that had the class, both junior and senior year. And I asked if we could produce this as like a senior project, if we could take some of those poems and interpret them on stage. And she's like, that sounds great. And so again, it was just us doing those. And there was that really recognition of the assets that we were going to bring, and that we were going to be fine doing it on our own. And, those are deeply memorable experiences for me, and I hope that somewhere along the way that I allowed some people to do things like that too.
I love that. Your true love of literacy runs really deep.
It does. It's lifelong.
Yeah. And I see we have in the chat all experiences in my fourth grade science class. I loved how hands-on it was. I'm a hands-on learner and love science. We did a fake ecosystem with a hybrid animal, learned how water filters through rock pebbles and sand, organized out the human body organs by materials, and we found it resembled the shape of them, etc. Oh, I love
Mhm.
that.
Yeah.
Because when I was thinking about this too, I don't remember what grade it was in, but we had to do something with an animal and we had to do the research on the animal and that where I was just like, okay, I didn't love the literacy like you, Bridget, at that point. But what I loved is that we could create the animal. And like McKenna mentioned in the chat, I'm a hands-on learner. So like, and I love crafts. And so like I could put that into action and create something. And I just remember my aunt helping me build a panda out of styrofoam balls and black and white felt, and we made it through the experience together. But like it was great.
Really
I
bringing
think
that vision to life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, mine would be my sixth grade ELA class. We had this whole like Titanic unit, which I is maybe when my interest and obsession then of the Titanic and related shipwrecks came about. But it was really cool because our teacher had us do a lot of like different readings and like reading diaries of like Titanic survivors and things like that. And then we each essentially got to take on the role of someone who was on the Titanic. And so we had like kind of a little card about them. And then we were able to do like diary writings and we're able to incorporate like other people in our class. And so just like a really kind of immersive experience that was also kind of cross curricular too, with some history pieces as well. So
I love that.
Yeah, me too.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing, everyone. So with that being said, we're going to kind of jump in here first with our engagement accelerators and kind of just remind you that our document is linked on here. You can click on this image and it will take you to the PDF. So if you need that reminder of our engagement accelerators, that is there. And today we are going to be focusing in on asset-driven teaching. And so we kind of define that as when educators create a learning environment that leverages and values students' backgrounds and lived experiences. So we are going to really kind of dig in this today. And I couldn't think of a better person to be sharing about this today other than our guest today. So just remember that this is really leaning into what students are bringing to the table, what they're bringing, not just their knowledge base, but their personal experiences, their cultures, their who they are, their overall identities. And this meshes with what everyone else is bringing, as well as what you are bringing to the teaching situation. And so we do have some of the components of asset-driven teaching on here, just kind of breaking down some of those ones we saw on the previous slide to kind of really give a little bit deeper meaning if this is something that's new to you. So feel free to reference back to this if something's mentioned this evening that you want to dig a little bit further into. So with that being said, let's move into our 3P learning for asset-driven teaching with the wonderful Lindsay Lane. She is one of our, or not one of, she is the innovation learning consultant.
The one and only.
At Ken ISD. She works closely with Dubui, who was on a previous episode with us. But she has a lot of experience, and I'll let her share some of that around really bringing learning to life, around just interactive experiences, making learning authentic. And she does it in a great way. And I'm excited to see what she has to share here tonight. So as she is introducing herself, anything that she would like to add, I'm going to stop sharing so that she can share her screen.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today and share with you all a little bit about 3P learning. So, thinking about what is 3P learning. So, there are a lot of definitions when it comes to 3P, but essentially we're talking about project-based learning, problem-based learning, and place-based learning. So, this is going to really be kind of a crash course in the next like 35 minutes or so around these areas. So, just know that we're going to kind of do an overview of each of these, but you can obviously spend a lot more time kind of digging into each aspect of this. But problem-based learning is really focusing on how students are gaining knowledge and skills, really working through kind of an investigation and responding to an authentic, engaging, or complex question, problem, or challenge. And PBL Works is really one of the leaders within project-based learning. So we'll look at kind of their model in a little bit. Problem-based learning is really focused on kind of a student-centered approach where students are working towards trying to solve an open-ended problem. And that's really what's going to drive that motivation for learning. So problem-based learning is a little bit more ambiguous, and I'll talk about how it is pretty closely tied with inquiry-based learning as well. So we'll talk about some different frameworks with that. And then lastly, place-based learning is looking at how are you really immersing students in like the local community, culture, heritage, landscape, and really connecting that with the community, with place. So I've linked here Promise of Place, which is a great resource for that. And I'll also talk about Teton Science Schools, which also has some great resources. All right, so what we're going to do next is I'm going to put up a couple different projects on these slides. And so as we go through them, I want you to just think about what do all of these projects have in common? Have you, maybe as a student in your K through 12 experience, done some of these projects? Maybe as a teacher, have you had students do some of these projects? So just kind of reflect on those as we go through these. All right, so we have the macaroni diorama. I believe this is of the Salem witch trials. Take it for what you will. So lovely macaroni diorama. We've got the dinosaur kind of shoebox diorama, which I believe I did in the second grade. Mine definitely did not look as great as this one does. We've got, it looks like Harry Potter themed cereal box, like book summary. So I believe I remember doing this as a maybe middle school, high school project. And then we've got of course, the science project that is the volcano, first prize, pretty good. And we've got a poster board of Amelia Earhart, some information about her. All right, so thinking about all of those particular projects, we can maybe think about a lot of those that maybe we experienced as students or that we've seen before. And these are sort of what we would call dessert projects. And I'll talk a little bit about what that means. But I want you to think about for a second, with those projects, if these were things that you experienced, were they typically at the end of a unit? Like you went through all of the learning, it was typically just kind of at the end, maybe summarizing some of that learning. Did you complete it on your own? Like it was a solo project and maybe it was at home. So you're asking your parents the night before it's due to go out to the store and get the poster board. Hopefully not, but that always happens. Was it just mainly focused on the end product, not necessarily kind of sprinkling in some of that learning or working towards the project throughout? Who was the audience for this? So was it like displayed only in the classroom? Was it just taken home at the end? And then was it just directed by the teacher? So if you kind of check the box on a lot of these are sort of characteristics of what we would call dessert projects. So this graphic comes from PBL Works, who's really a great leader in project-based learning. And I really like this graphic as it talks about a lot of things in which we experience sometimes with doing projects in school that are just doing a project, right, is sort of what they call dessert. So this kind of checks a lot of the boxes of what we just looked at. So it really remains in the school world. It's typically kind of an add-on at the end of traditional instruction. Really follows the direction of the teacher. Like you might have some voice and choice in terms of what you want to do, but really the teacher is kind of dictating what it is that you create. really focused on a product and kind of remains in that school world. So the idea behind this is that we want to start shifting our thinking and instruction from this dessert and doing a project to making this project more of the main course that is project-based learning. So this is what we'll dig into a little bit today. So this is really where instruction is going to be integrated into the project. So the project really is the unit instead of having your traditional instruction and then having your project at the end. Instead of really just following the direction of the teacher, it's really driven by student inquiry. So we know it should still be aligned with academic standards and success skills, but that students should still have like a question they want to answer, a challenge, they should still have a say in those things. It's focused on the product and the process. So not just the product at the end, but also the process of learning. And again, that project's going to be embedded throughout the unit instead of just at the end. It has that hopefully collaboration with other students and then guidance, facilitation from the teacher. It has that real world context and application. And hopefully the results of the project are shared beyond the classroom in a more sort of public way. So again, thinking about the dessert and main course projects, dessert projects can be a great place to start as kind of an entry point to project-based learning. And so it's not to say that desserts projects are bad by any means, but it's thinking about how can we level up these projects to make sure that they're more meaningful and kind of meet some of these elements of project-based learning. So here's a couple project-based learning models. The left one, gold standard PBL, comes from PBL Works, and they have essentially defined 7 essential project design elements. So what are the elements of a really high quality project-based learning project? So we just kind of explored some of these with looking at the dessert versus main course, but things like challenging problem or question. So are students introduced to really at the start of the project or the unit, what's a challenging problem or question they're encountering? Sustained inquiry. So how are students continuing to engage in the inquiry cycle and asking questions throughout? Authenticity. So like, is this an authentic real world problem, connection, challenge that students are engaging with? Student voice and choice. So having students have some sort of voice within what they're learning, choice, whether it's within maybe the final product they're creating or something else. Embedding that reflection throughout. So hopefully at the end of the unit, but as well as throughout the entire project. Critiquing and revising. So how are students engaging in getting feedback, making revisions on their product throughout, and then having that public product at the end. So on the right-hand side, I have another model from High Quality PBL, and they've actually used a lot of PBL Works 7 design elements to kind of influence theirs. And so just taking a look at this, we have a lot that are pretty similar. The authenticity, the public product, collaboration, reflection. So a couple different ones. And so I just wanted to point out that, you know, thinking about if you are interested in bringing more project-based learning to your classroom, there's a lot of different models out there. And it's not to say that there's a right or wrong one to use. Think about what one works best for you. What are things that you're already doing in your classroom and how can you use these to level up? And you'll see by looking at a lot of these models that quite a few of them are the same when it comes to some of these key elements that you want to have within a project. All right, so one approach that I really take with project-based learning is combining it with design thinking. So I believe my colleague Du, who was on a couple months ago maybe, talked a little bit about the design thinking piece. And so in our work, we typically use this to really help give project-based learning a little bit more of a framework. And so sometimes it can be difficult when we're starting with project-based learning and we think about, okay, we've got this awesome project, but how do we get students from the start of the project to the end of the project? And we know all these great key elements that we want to include. So I like combining project-based learning with design thinking because design thinking kind of provides the process and the structure, almost like the vehicle for learning. And then PBL does a good job of ensuring that your content and your standards and your skills are aligned to this. So I have this graphic from John Spencer that's in the bottom left corner that just does a nice job of showing how PBL by design comes together by blending those elements of project-based learning and design thinking And then in the top left, I have the design thinking process that the Kent ISD has developed that is really kind of inspired from Stanford D schools, as well as there's a lot of other leaders kind of in design thinking like IDEO. So if you look into design thinking a little bit more, you'll see some patterns with that. All right, so a little example of a project-based learning project. So I really wanted to think about, we are local to Grand Rapids, and so what's something that might be relevant to our community? So I have this project called the People's Porch, and our driving question is, how can we design a piece of urban furniture that honors our neighborhood's history while solving a modern community need? So Grand Rapids is kind of known as Furniture City. And thinking about how students could investigate a little bit of the history of Grand Rapids with Furniture City. And while they could look at some museums, also looking at what are things in their community and do they see an issue possibly in their community that could need a sort of solution for some sort of furniture. So it could be like a bus stop, it could be a community garden that needs a table or a bench. And then students can really engage in that design process of designing, prototyping, and creating a piece of furniture that is really representative of the community. So this is just a little breakdown of what this might look like to use the PBL by design process. So having students engage in empathy, so actually getting to know their community. Where does it look like that people gather or struggle with certain things? Students could engage with interviewing neighbors, family members, community members to really define what the problem is. You could have some great math connections here to connect geometry and algebra to calculate the cost of materials, to ensure that whatever piece of furniture students are creating is structurally sound. And then also incorporate possibly a mural, a quote, a story that they've learned throughout the project. So also engaging in some prototyping, maybe building a scale model before they actually build it out, pitching to local designers, receiving feedback and making changes, and then thinking about how they could present their designs to a real life audience. So thinking about that public product piece of maybe the Grand Rapids City Parks, local neighborhood associations, and get feedback to actually put their furniture in the city. So why do we care about PBL? Why does PBL work? So PBL has been shown to be a more effective teaching method over traditional methods of teaching. And this has been shown in multiple content areas and particular content areas. So we've seen a retention of content knowledge longer and that students have a deeper understanding of content versus traditional methods. And then thinking about the engagement pieces, when students have more voice and choice over their learning, we know that they're going to be more engaged. They're going to have an increased ownership and sense of autonomy over their learning. And then thinking about how some of those elements of PBL, such as the sustained inquiry, provide a challenge for students that leads to higher engagement. And students have been shown to have more positive attitudes towards learning and better attendance. So I've linked a source at the bottom there that talks, is pretty recent actually from 2025 that talks about particular research around student engagement and actually implementing PBL that comes from PBL Works. That is a great source to explore if you're interested in learning more. So some ideas for implementing project-based learning. Think about an existing unit or project that you currently teach. Where do you see any of those key elements of PBL show up? These are things that you might already be doing and things that we can just continue to elevate. Or if you find that they're not present, are there a couple of adjustments that you could make to incorporate some of those elements? And my suggestion is always just to try to implement a few elements at a time and then gradually incorporate more. So at the bottom right, I have this visual from PBL Works that is called the dimmer switch approach. And they really talk about how we need to approach project-based learning more as a dimmer switch and not a light switch. So like we switch on the light switch and we do project-based learning and then we turn it off and we never do it again until the project comes about next year. So they're like, nope, don't do that. So I love the idea of the dimmer switch of how can we just start to add in small elements of PBL over time and approach it more as the dimmer switch. So our instruction becomes more PBL-like over time. So I just encourage you to think about that. And then there's a lot of great PBL project kind of libraries out there to get ideas. I'll share at the end, West Michigan PBL Network is a kind of collaborative site that I'm involved in, where we have a lot of projects from Kent, Ottawa, and Muskegon counties that local teachers have done, as well as PBL Works has a great project library where they share kind of some different ideas. You can take a look at different content areas and grades. And then getting started small with a short project, 1 to 2 weeks, is always a great kind of starting point as well to try it out and see how it goes. All right, so either kind of to yourself right now, or if you want to share something in the chat, what was something that resonated with you about PBL? If you currently use project-based learning, how do you currently use PBL? And what are some of your thoughts about how you might elevate projects to become more of the main course?
Lindsay, when I first got to see your slides as you're putting your presentation together, I really appreciated that dessert versus main course model in my mind, where it's not, we're waiting to the end and we're having this special little celebratory moment, but the main course is where I'm getting my nutrition, and it's where, I'm filling myself with what I need. And that is exactly, how you're helping us see 3P learning, that this is where the learning should be happening while you're doing it, not before.
It also made me think too, as you were talking, Lindsay, sometimes people have these scripted curriculums that they need to follow because today is day 60, 67, and we need to do whatever is planned. But I think there are so many ways that you could even use that as a jumping point, just thinking like how many science connections can be made to a lot of those scripted curriculums. That could be something that you use. Maybe that's your literacy component, what's scripted. But then you can translate that into math, science, and whatever else so that you're bringing all those different subjects together.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah. I know a lot of times districts can be kind of constrained by curriculums, but I think there's a lot of ways in which we can utilize what we already have and then try to bring in some of those PBL elements if they're not present. So.
Yeah, and in the chat we have, I love the idea of having the project being the unit instead of just the ending.
Awesome. Thank you, McKenna. All right. So we're going to kind of transition. So today if I was going to tell you I'm your teacher and we're going to learn about what a primary source is, I want you to think about, how does this make you feel? Does this make you excited to learn about primary sources? Now, I was a history teacher, so like I'm geeked about primary sources anyways, but probably a lot of us maybe not feel super excited. All right, what about this? What is a primary source? What do you know about primary sources? How does this make you feel? Does this make you any more excited to learn about primary sources? I'm at least asking you a little bit more about, what do you know? Maybe what is it? And then what about this question? How do we know what really happened here before we were born? How does this make you feel? So thinking about even that small shift, instead of thinking about like presenting content with this is what we're going to learn about today, and thinking about how we can switch it to a question, how that automatically could be more engaging of like, oh, how do we really actually know what happened here before we were born? And that's why we look to these primary sources to kind of tell us a little bit about that. So that's kind of our introduction to problem-based learning and inquiry. So a little bit of the history of this, and I talked about how problem-based learning is a little bit more ambiguous. Unlike project-based learning, there is a little less of like one model of how to do it, which can make it a little tough to find information. But what's sort of interesting about problem-based learning is it actually comes from the medical field, which actually makes kind of a lot of sense. So it came from McMaster University, who kind of coined this problem-based learning approach, and really focused on like developing learning based on the problem, using resources to kind of seek out, assess, and synthesize information, apply information to the problem, discuss the findings, and then process that within groups and assess that information. So when we think about, they were kind of approaching this this problem-based learning with medical problems. So if you're seeing a patient actually in the field, what sort of the medical problem they're dealing with, how can we use our research and understanding to actually apply it to the problem, discuss the findings with other, doctors, others in the medical field, and then process and actually apply that information. So kind of an interesting background a little bit with this. So really the core of problem-based learning is that your problem, or like possibly kind of a case study problem, is serving as like the stimulus for their learning. So this is where it's very student-led, it's very self-directed. So students are kind of starting with prior knowledge and experiences, working collaboratively with a group, and kind of creating those own learning objectives, and are really involved in the research and analysis of the problem. So problem-based learning is sometimes a little confusing because sometimes it's used interchangeably with inquiry-based learning, and sometimes they mean the same thing and sometimes they don't. So I wanted to just kind of point that out here, that these are kind of 5 overarching components of inquiry-based learning. And I've linked a research article at the bottom of the slides if you're accessing them that talks about some of those phases. And again, this is where in education and different fields that use inquiry-based learning, it may look like slightly different. But again, it's really where students are being presented with that question, topic, problem. They're asking questions, making predictions, hypotheses, and then are really engaging within the investigation to find answers, make conclusions with the problem, and then discuss and share those results. So really they have a very similar framework, but just know that if you see these, sometimes they're used interchangeably and sometimes they can mean different or similar things, but really do have kind of the same process and framework. All right, so a little example of problem-based or inquiry project example could be the Great Lakes thirst. So who gets to decide where our water goes? So oftentimes with problem-based learning or inquiry, we see kind of like a hook or a scenario that students are kind of posed with. So in this scenario, we have a state like Arizona who is dealing with a drought, and they have proposed building a massive underground pipeline to borrow water from Lake Michigan to provide drinking water for its city. So they're offering Michigan billions of dollars in water taxes that could help fix all of our crumbling roads and bridges. So the problem here is that students are posed with, if we say yes, we get the money as a state, but this could impact our water levels, our tourism, shipping, fish populations. And if we say no, we get to keep our water, but lose the chance to fix some of our infrastructure. So students could engage in investigation that includes maps, thinking about what makes the Great Lakes unique and why would people possibly want our water, and then look at some of those economic activities, usage of water, and any sort of legal agreements we have. So while this is kind of a fictional scenario, which you can absolutely give students, it is really grounded in the real world. So when we think about that authenticity, and we'll talk towards the end today about what do all of the 3 Ps have in common, and thinking about how this is really one of those commonalities of an authentic problem. And so even if you're giving students a somewhat made up scenario, thinking about how is it grounded in the real world, or giving students a real world problem, because we do see this issue of water is pretty prevalent within our country, within our state, that can be really authentic and real to students. So again, some of those overlaps with project-based learning, things like that sustained inquiry, challenging problem or question, student voice and choice, and authenticity. All right, so why this works, students are more likely to do better in high school and actually finish high school, have better performance on standardized tests. They are more invested and self-motivated in their learning. They have a better understanding and greater mastery of content, so similar to what we saw with project-based learning, and overall improved knowledge retention and higher levels of learning over just learning facts. So some strategies for starting with problem-based learning or inquiry. I always recommend like starting small. So thinking about back to the beginning when I introduced this, of instead of saying like, this is what we're going to learn about today, how can you turn a unit topic into a question or a problem? How could you take, we talked about existing curriculum a little bit, how could you take some existing curriculum you have and turn it more into a problem or a framing question, so students have a little bit more autonomy and they can guide their own learning? And then really allowing students to ask their own questions and then conduct research to answer those questions. Just so thinking about how can you embed that into any sort of existing unit or project that you have. All right, so crash course in problem-based learning and inquiry. Feel free if you want to share out or share in the chat. What are some ways that you currently use problem-based or inquiry-based learning, and what are some thoughts you have on how you might incorporate more inquiry into your classroom or your context?
Yeah, I want to lift more of a comment that was in the chat. It was actually at the end of the last section, but it very much relates to this in that overlap that you're talking about, Lindsay. McKenna was saying that this really, it creates more opportunities for collaboration. So instead of that night before I need the science board, mom and dad, it's an ongoing collaboration to answer and ask and answer questions, sort of cyclically. So you're really tapping into that. We're figuring this out together, and the students are leading that with their own questions.
Yeah, and as Lindsay was talking and you just mentioning that there, Bridget, my thought originally went to, especially with elementary kiddos, like all the questions that come with things. Like this totally invites all those questions, where a lot of times, like do for the sake of time, like, can you hold that? We'll get back to that at the end of this or whatever. But this invites that as part of the process. Like ask all the questions, because that's going to help us, guide our learning and get to what the root of what this problem might be, kind of thing.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a great point. There's a protocol I use quite a bit that is called the 5 whys protocol. That's great for this, and it's like almost embracing your inner 3-year-old of like why does this happen? And so yeah, I love what you shared, Sarah. Is that and then when we think about engagement, that inherently is going to make students more engaged if they feel like their voice is heard and they are asking those questions, and they're going to be more engaged because they want to find out the answer and they feel like validated if the teacher is taking that into consideration with their learning.
Yeah, McKenna's coming in also and saying she teaches SCI students, and many of her students are nonverbal. So she's continually looking for ways for them to be able to bring those questioning pieces in. I'm sure lots of technology and different strategies, but always trying to learn new ways so that each student can be involved and given opportunities to answer questions equally. Which is critical that we have that equitable access and that voice across the room, and not just in any classroom like the 3 kids who talk all the time.
Yeah, that's a really great point. Awesome. All right, so our last P of 3P learning, engaging with place. So I want you to just kind of take a look out your window right now, or wherever you are, if you can take a look at your view. And I'm in one of our new conference rooms, and I'm like surrounded by windows, and it's beautiful. So I want you to take a look at, what does your view look like right now? So are you looking out at a natural landscape, a more urban one, maybe like it's a heavily kind of landscaped area? And I want you to think about one of these systems to kind of look at and just do a quick kind of recording of what you see. So this could be looking at like an ecosystem. So are there birds, insects, different types of plants maybe you're seeing? Are you seeing like evidence of like the human flow? So are there different modes of transportation, bikes, pedestrians, cars? And then material world, what do you see in with architecture? So what sort of materials do you see, like brick, glass, wood? And then kind of putting on our inquiry hat, thinking about what you see, what is a question you might ask about that? So if I'm seeing a bunch of birds in one spot here, I might ask, why are they congregating on that specific ledge? Or seeing traffic, like, why is the street busier at 2:00 p.m. than I expected? Like maybe there's a school nearby. Or at the ISD, we have a lot of geese. And so I might ask, why are there so many geese in this one particular area? And then look to kind of find some answers with that.
It's so funny you say that, Lindsay, because I was providing a presentation today to a group, and I was over at our conference center, and normally the geese will come right up to the windows that are over there. And I just had like that little mental side quest as one of my teammates was presenting, because a robin came up to the window and just perched on the ledge. And I remember looking at it going like, what is that robin doing there? We never see robins right there. It's always geese. And then I
Yeah.
looked at what you put on here. Like if you saw birds, why are they congregating on that specific ledge? That was my thought in that moment. Like, is this robin really interested in HR personnel and AI? Because I know it's riveting, but for birds, okay, I see.
That's so funny. All right. Thanks for sharing. So, a couple place-based learning models similar to PBL. There are a couple really kind of high-quality models. So these come from Teton Science Schools, and I really like their approach to place-based learning that incorporates that ecology, economy, and culture pieces. And so, depending on where you are and kind of what your response was to the last question, you might see more examples of culture or ecology, or took on a specific kind of slant to that question. And then on the right-hand side, they really have those learner-centered practices in the middle. So how are we doing a good job of integrating like the content that we teach with place? How are we looking at like community impact and how are we impacting our community? And then my favorite one is thinking about our community as a classroom. And so not just thinking about the four walls of our classroom, but how are we engaging with community in more of a broader sense? And so thinking about if I'm teaching downtown Grand Rapids, how am I thinking and using more of the city within my content? So another great example is the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative here in Michigan, and we're fortunate to have Groundswell, which is part of the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative in our area. So I just wanted to highlight there are 6 elements of place-based stewardship education that really, I think, do a good job of overlapping with a lot of the work of Teton Science Schools. And then also thinking about that overlap with project-based learning and problem-based learning too, of looking at the community, identifying some sort of issue, developing like a partnership. So looking at who are experts in the community, researching that, and then completing that action project. So again, thinking about a lot of those overlaps. I apologize, this isn't a great visual, but I've linked on the bottom here from Teton Science Schools, but I really wanted to point this out as an example of PBE because I think this is a great one comparing traditional science instruction with a traditional science instruction integrated with place-based education. So this example is a science unit. They have 2 different units, one on work, power, energy, and heat, and another one on magnetism and electricity. So we can see with this traditional unit, it's very much like we've got 2 different lectures, we have an activity, another lecture, and then we have an exam. So again, thinking about if you are somewhat constrained by your curriculum, there's still ways in which we can use that kind of traditional instruction or integrating that curriculum, but what is maybe a piece of PBE, that local kind of community connection that you could add to this? So in this example with the PBE context, students would be looking at the electric bill for the school during different seasons, or they're welcome to come to my house and figure out what is happening with my electric and gas bills. But I live in an old house, so it makes sense. And then looking at observations of behavior and interviews, again, thinking about that inquiry process, and determining that obviously your electricity use is higher during the winter because of using those electric heaters. So students then could design and install door insulators to reduce heat loss after experimenting with various ways to insulate. So in this particular example, you might still have some of those traditional lectures and activities where students are like still having to learn the content, but you've made it more authentic to them by looking at the particular school building and making this a really authentic problem. Or you could have even students engage in this at their home as well and make some of those kind of parallel connections. Another example, and I really like this one, comparing a project-based learning unit with the PBE cost. So similar units. So our project-based learning, we might start with asking, what is the world's energy use? Students might do some research on power, engage in some different activities on energy and making a model, and then that ends with the presentation. So with that PBE context, we might start by kind of asking this question of an inquiry of why are blackouts happening at school? You might still integrate some of those more traditional kind of instructional methods. So you might have a lecture on power and work, but then we have an interview with a power company employee. Maybe you have an interview with someone at the school who's trying to figure out what's going on. Having a local tour of a power station, and then students kind of end by designing solutions and writing to the local power company. So, and I love that this one also integrates some ELA into this as well. So we're seeing that interdisciplinary connection of writing and editing letters as well. All right, so thinking about why place-based learning works, this is really where learning is made relevant to students. So it's very much grounded in the local community and gives students a sense of place and belonging. Since they have a little bit more autonomy, voice, and choice, that's going to inherently boost engagement and motivation. And there's a lot of great skills that we see that come out of place-based learning. So things like critical thinking, collaboration, self-esteem, SEL skills, as well as durable skills. And we also see improved academic scores from standardized test scores, as well as performance improvements. So some strategies for place-based learning. Again, starting small, but thinking about, could you take students on a walk of your school grounds, a neighborhood, a local place, if you're maybe in the city or in the country, and then use kind of some of those inquiry pieces to ask students to take note of, what do they notice? What are some issues that they see? What sort of questions do they have? And what kind of connections can you make between your curriculum and your community? So this is at the bottom here, this kind of graphic I created is adapted from Teton Science Schools that kind of talks about moving from left to right with that ultimate goal of the community as the classroom. And so starting with those local experiences, starting with field trips, service learning experiences that you can have students do. So like going to help clean up a river or clean up a park. Or just giving your curriculum a little bit more of that local context, thinking about a couple of those examples we explored. Then starting to even move that to inquiries and investigations and projects and problems that are going to be more connected with community and place, and then moving to that ultimate goal of the community as the classroom. All right, so feel free to verbally or in the chat share what was something that resonated with you about place-based learning, and how might you connect learning to place and the outdoors in your classroom or your context?
I just want to share, I primarily work with just educators, but one thing that we've started integrating into some of our longer days when we have workshops or just full day meetings kind of thing is a break for movement, but we provide our participants with a podcast that they can listen to, so they can just plug in their headphones and walk around and do that. And the conversations that come of those, sometimes people pair up, sometimes they go on their own. But the conversations are wild that come after that. Like, I never knew this was here, or we talked about this kind of thing because we saw this. So even as educators, we still have that inquiry about our space around us.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Sarah. That's awesome.
Yeah, McKenna says that they take their class walking every day when it's nice out, that they could do, a variety of things. Well, things that resonates with me, I think, Lindsay, is a lot of, I can't speak for a lot of people, I will say me, but I think other people sometimes have this impression when you visualize environmental programs, and when you talk about it being place, could be urban. I could just go out and look into my community because there is a place and it has an ecosystem and it has this human flow and it has all of these aspects that you can also find. They look different in an urban setting versus a rural setting, but they're all still there, and they're all something that can spark that inquiry.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think sometimes we have to kind of redefine when we think about like place-based learning, or we think about like outdoor learning, like, oh, that can't happen because I'm in the city. And like, I taught downtown Grand Rapids for 7 years, and so we were constantly using the city and trying to find green spaces, but also, yeah, thinking about how much culture and what other opportunities, expertise like are within the city that we can utilize with this. So Thanks for bringing that up. All right, so thinking about what do all of these have in common? So by no means is this an exhaustive list, but I wanted to just kind of highlight a couple, and hopefully as we've gone through these, you've noticed some of those commonalities. So we really see kind of that challenging problem or question amongst all three of the P's here. So as well as that inquiry-based, so again, connecting to the problems, but asking questions. How are each of these really kind of grounded within inquiry or that question at the beginning? The authenticity. So like, how is it an authentic problem that students are engaging with? How are they engaging with real world examples? And then really that student-centered learning. So students within each of these have a lot of voice and choice, a lot of kind of say in what it is that they're learning. So I just wanted to kind of highlight, by no means do you have to integrate all three P's. There's some people that really like to focus on one aspect of these, but thinking about if you're integrating, the challenging problem or question or authenticity, a lot of times you might be hitting on multiple aspects of the three P's without you even knowing. So it's always kind of a great thing to think about. All right, so returning to our components of asset-driven teaching, how does this align with our 3P learning? So where do we see these show up? So when we think about the asset-based thinking, we are thinking about student strengths rather than deficits, and we want to make sure that we are having this high regard for learners' background and capabilities. So I think this does a really great job when we think about inquiry, is that we're letting students drive their own learning, right? We're allowing them to have voice and choice, and ensuring that we're giving students the opportunity to maybe make choices about the product they're creating, the topic they're specifically diving into. And the nice thing about this voice and choice piece is that it's kind of allowing for that natural differentiation. So that's giving more of a regard to students' capabilities and also ensuring that they are challenged. So another kind of recommendation or strategy would be to ensure that your curriculum is connected to students' backgrounds and interests. So I have an example here that maybe students are really interested in hip hop. How could you maybe integrate that into an art class or history? And then also thinking about what kind of expertise do students bring to the classroom. So that's really kind of the backbone of when we think about this asset-driven teaching is that our students all have expertise that they bring to the classroom. And so how are we getting to know students and ensuring that we're kind of bringing that into, this project work that we are doing when engaging them with 3P. When we think about this student efficacy, so fostering students' belief in their ability by providing support, resources, and affirming feedback, with 3P learning, your role as a teacher is really kind of shifting, which can be a little bit uncomfortable at first. I'll be honest about that. It's becoming more of that facilitator or kind of that guide on the side. And so a lot of times with this, you're allowing students to take more ownership over their learning, which we know that is going to be better for engagement. And this can also really help to kind of foster that growth mindset. So it's less about focusing on getting the right answer a lot of times with problem-based learning, project-based learning, and place-based learning, but it's more of that learning process and helping students to develop more of that growth mindset. And then also encouraging you to think about what are some opportunities where students can not only receive your feedback as a teacher, but also peer feedback and feedback from experts that you might be working with as well when we think about some of those partnerships. All right, I've kind of grouped our high expectations and challenge and rigor together for this one. But I think the nice thing about 3P learning is that it inherently kind of promotes those rigorous tasks in learning. So when we think about what's really high on Bloom's taxonomy, things like analyzing, evaluating, and creating, that's where we really see kind of 3P learning live and thrive. So learning should ultimately help students develop those key durable skills. So when we think about the problem solving, critical thinking, investigation, that's really where we see these show up. Ensuring the alignment to standards with projects and tasks is really important. And when we think about at the beginning where we talked about the dessert versus main course projects, it's really key to ensure that what we are doing with these projects are aligned to standards. And then coming back to that growth mindset as well, to help students realize that they can succeed. And then lastly, that's social and school context. So how are we thinking about kind of the broader social cultural setting where learning occurs? So those community ties, norms. And so I really emphasize the importance of understanding and learning about the community in which your students live and the neighborhood in which you teach. So going back to this idea of what kind of assets and knowledge and expertise does the community have and do your students have, that you can learn from. So what are some ways in which you could connect with local community members, experts, and places to help facilitate a lot of this student learning that could happen within any of the frameworks of 3P learning? Oh, just kidding. Last one. Identity and belonging. So helping students see themselves reflected in the curriculum and feel valued. So learning about your students' cultures and identities, and thinking about that when you are creating these projects or inquiries. Choosing curriculum, books, materials that reflect student identity. So when we think of like the mirrors, windows, sliding glass doors, how are students seeing themselves within not only like the texts and books, but also the curriculum. So when you're presenting them with this particular project or inquiry, ensuring that it's going to be something that is relevant to them and authentic. And then allowing students to have that voice and choice with what they create, how they approach a problem, and topics that they are interested in. All right, so a quick kind of reflection. Feel free to share out or share in the chat. What are 3 important points you've learned? What is something that squared or agreed with your thinking? And what is something that is maybe still kind of circling for you, you're still kind of processing and thinking about?
Lindsay, you've really got me thinking about, I'm thinking particularly about place-based and that idea of just opening your eyes and looking at what's around you. And when you come in saying, hey, I'm going to teach you about primary sources today, as opposed to asking questions about how do we know about who was here before us, and you apply any of that to the community, a student who might start feeling like, I don't know anything about this, like this is separate from me, this is this academic thing that's not, it might not be interesting to me, it's maybe not a part of what I think I know. But when you start with, let's take a look at this community and what's going on here, those students frequently know a lot about the community. They know a lot about their families and their homes and what people around them are doing and thinking. And you're really bringing that, that asset base, like look at all you know, now let's explore what's needed.
And
yeah, absolutely.
And I swear that students recognize things in our plain sight that we don't ever see. So that even brings the inquiry in for us to ask more about their thinking too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Students definitely notice a lot of things that we don't always notice. So or see.
Yeah, I agree. McKenna's noting that each learning strategy has similarities, but they're also a little different, depending upon what you focus and concentrate on. And that having each of these utilized in their own way can deepen students' learning and, of course, also provide that diverse instruction. So we're teaching diverse learners, and we can look at ways to diversify our instruction and our ideas around it.
I love that. Thank you. All right, so wrapping up, just a couple of resources, things that I talked about. I didn't really talk about MasteryMate, but this is a PBL and AI tool that is kind of a great, I would say like brainstorming kind of framing tool for getting started with project-based learning. So I definitely encourage you to take a look at that. And then PBL Works has a lot of great kind of starting points for looking at projects, as well as the West Michigan PBL network if you want to look at some kind of local things to our area. And then I have a lot of other sources linked within the slides that I had too. So things like the Great Lakes Stewardship Initiative, Teton Science Schools, as well, that are great resources.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say there's 3 resources there, but this slide deck is loaded with lots and lots
Yeah,
of
I didn't want to
research and
rehash
resources
everything, so.
and libraries. So we're going to make sure that we note that on the show notes, that the overview, that like go through the slides and click on the little blue links, because there's a wealth of information there. Thank you so much, Lindsay. If people have questions, they can get a hold of you at your email address there. I know that you do lots of work around the local communities. So thank you again for being willing to help support this really important work around authentic learning and its student engagement. And if you can buzz us right through the next slide or two here. Some of those upcoming opportunities. Is there anything you wanted to highlight there, Lindsay?
I guess I'll just highlight the kind of the first 2 coming up in June. So there is an opportunity if you are a teacher grades 4 through 12 to participate in the West Michigan Design Prize. And I apparently have last year's on that, so that should be your 26 to 27. But this June, hoping to have a little bit of a launch for that. So look at that coming up to Learning Stream. This summer, I will have an asynchronous PD with Catherine Fredrickson, who's one of our other ed tech consultants that is looking at kind of teacher burnout and the design thinking process. So that will run this summer. And then, yeah, just a couple opportunities for the fall as well, kind of especially around project-based learning.
Yeah, thank you. Designing My Best Summer sounds like a wonderful way to learn the design process while also doing yourself some good.
Yeah, we had really great feedback from it last year, so I would encourage you to take a look at it if you're interested.
I love that. All right, so moving forward, in order to get sketches, whether you are live or view this recorded, don't forget to turn in that exit ticket. All of the exit tickets, we're actually getting closer to the date now. All the exit tickets for all of the episodes need to be in by Friday, May 23rd. And I am going to drop the link in the chat really quick for people that are on. And then we've only got one left. Oh my gosh, I can't even believe it. So one more in May coming up with Dr. Mike Maximchuk, who is our assessment consultant at Kent ISD. And there's one more opportunity, right, Sarah?
One more that double down. So if you apply any of your learning from any of the episodes, not just the one you're listening to today, and you put that into action, it is a very low stakes thing as another way to receive another sketch credit, and go to the link for the application and answer a couple of questions and you get another sketch credit.
Awesome.
And if you wouldn't mind jumping forward one, Lindsay, I know that Lindsay had a whole slide with all of her different learning opportunities that are coming up. I know that I say it every time, don't want to miss the AI Summit. It's going to be where it's at. And then also having our real versus real, where you can take a look at how AI shows up in films. So basically you watch a movie and you get some sketch credit for kind of reflecting on it. And Bridget, what do you have going on?
Well, we're continuing to put together some fresh new ideas. Actually, I had 2 meetings today about things that aren't even on here yet. So we're excited about what it's going to look like in the fall. We have book studies coming, but also more opportunities. So just watch Learning Stream. Also, anytime, reach out to us, especially if you're a Kent County educator. We love to work directly with districts and help meet your student engagement needs. We are 3 minutes over because Lindsay had so much incredible stuff. If I were a person, actually, I am a person who's interested in this, and I've gone through her presentation twice, and I'm going to do it again because there's such rich content. Thank you, Lindsay. And thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me.